Good afternoon. You're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial, heard globally on WPVMFM.org, and also on our new app available on iTunes or Google Play or even on Alexa. Just tell Alexa to play the voice of Asheville or play Asheville Radio, and you'll get connected to the station. I'm your host, Laura Wagenecht, president and owner of Mosaic Business Consulting, and you're listening to In Awe, which stands for Inspiring and Advancing Working Excellence. WPVM's mission is to foster community through programming that cultivates dialogue to inform and entertain. The station provides a network medium for artists, businesses, community leaders, and nonprofits to share their voices on live radio. You are invited to support WPVM's efforts by making a tax-deductible donation. You can do so by going to the website of WPVMFM.org and clicking on the donate option in the upper right-hand corner. Today, my guest is Deborah Laurel. And Deborah, with that beautiful background of hers, has been a workplace learning and performance improvement consultant for over 35 years. She designs virtual classroom and peer learning group programs for employees, managers, and trainers. If you're looking for high energy, quality learning experiences that engage and delight participants while building their skills, or if you'd like your trainers to learn how to do that themselves, talk with her. So, welcome to the show, Deborah. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's such a delight to have you on the show. And I know we've briefly chatted in the past, and you have this other company that you had. Um, I think you called it Laurel and Associates,
Right.
and that was a big part of that learning arm that you were talking about in your business. Maybe you could tell us how you got to where you are
How I got to where I am.
right
I think
now.
the the short story is I started the first feminist theater in the Midwest with another woman, and we
Oh,
were
wow.
doing a poem play about how the feminist movement affected women. And this was in the early 70s. I've been around for a long time. And there were two professors from family studies from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And this predated women's studies. And they came up to me after the play because we would open it up to conversation with the audience. And they said, "We'd like you to teach assertiveness." And I said, "Well, what is that?" And they said, "That's what you're doing, and read this book."
Oh, fantastic.
So I started to teach assertiveness in the evening while I was working in personnel for the state. And then that moved into moonlighting for the technical college in the supervisory technician program. And they would just say, "Can you teach X?" And I would say, "Oh, sure." And then I would go quick and figure out how to teach X, and then taught for Cardinal Stritch College in their master's programs, and
Wow.
then finally went off on my own.
Wow, wow. When you think about the trajectory that your life took, it's pretty amazing given the time frame you're talking about. The 70s was such a critical time for women. Wouldn't you agree on that?
Oh, absolutely. And our play, Empty Space Blues, was looking at all the different ways women were impacted by it.
Yeah. And do you find that you tend to gravitate toward women in your current business, or how would you describe who you help now?
I don't know that I can say I gravitate toward women. For a number of years, I was doing a lot of assertiveness training, and that was focused on women. Um, the my more recent work, for a good 14 years, I've done international training,
Wow.
and that's been to primarily to develop business skills for anybody, but in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Eastern Europe. And there it has resonated with both men and women, but I'm always drawn to the women because they, of course, have a little bit harder struggle
Yeah,
wherever
yeah,
we
and
happen to
well,
be.
and especially when you're talking about the Middle East and Africa and things of that nature. Wow, your travels are fascinating. I would love to pick your brain and have you share some stories about that. In fact, do you find that the U.S. culture is so disparate from the cultures in other countries that your training takes on different meaning?
Yes and no.
Okay.
My work in Jordan, and I was there 5 times. Um, Many of the programs that I did were to help people learn how to go into communities and build capacity, capacity building training.
Mhm,
This
mhm,
is for you through US aid
mhm,
primarily or through Mercy Corps.
mhm,
Um, and Mercy Corps doing train the trainer and then negotiation skills when you know that they're going into the Syrian camps
mm.
and they're dealing with a huge amount of conflict. Um, the impact of the training that I'm doing there is feels much greater than anything that I do in the States, which is not to say that training isn't important and trainers aren't making a difference every day in people's lives.
Yeah, yeah, I hear what you're saying. But I'd like to get and I'd like to talk to you about your training. So the past you talked about having training programs for employees and managers and things of that nature. Now I get a sense that you're really focused on the peer training. And I'd really love to learn a little bit more about the difference between what you did before and what you're doing now.
Certainly. Before and still now, I do workshops, the kind where whether it's classroom or virtual, where people come, they do practice their skills, and off they go. And whether or not that's reinforced, whether or not they use it, tends to be beyond my ken as an independent external consultant. With the Peer Learning Institute, the approach is thinking about managers, particularly middle managers,
Yeah, yeah.
who are promoted because they have technical expertise or high volume of sales, or they've just been there the longest. And there's this assumption that somehow by osmosis, they will get management skills or that the skills that they have are transferable, which they're not.
Exactly. It's a whole different ballgame because at one point they're just physically doing the tasks, and the next minute they're overseeing people. And overseeing people is a very different thing.
Absolutely. The communication skills, the interpersonal skills, what are sadly termed soft skills or human skills, are not necessarily the ones that they have learned.
Mm,
So instead of sending them to some class where they might learn something interesting, but it might not be timely. So when they get back to the job, it's not something they're going to put into practice right away.
mm,
We use peer learning groups. So 4 or 5 managers from the same organization, different parts of the organization, who are dealing with a similar issue, dealing with a hybrid workforce, for example, giving performance feedback,
mm,
things that can be very difficult and challenging for folks.
yeah.
We have them meet in two 90-minute sessions that are separated by a month of practice. And in the first session, both of these sessions are confidential. We provide the materials that give them discussion points and suggestions as to alternative ways to deal with that particular issue that they're dealing with. They select what they're going to do at the end of that first session. And then for a month, they go back and they use that new technique. Now, it's something they have to deal with anyway. It's
Right.
right there, it's current. And so it's just a different way of dealing with what they have to do. And we reinforce that month with weekly micro learning tips, weekly resource tips, having them check in weekly with a peer buddy drawn from the group so they keep each other on task and on track.
Nice.
And we also have them keep a small log. What did I do? What happened? What did I learn? And they know that at the end of that month, they will be held accountable by their group because they're going
Mhm.
to come back and they're going to have to report on what did I do? What
Oh,
happened? What did
yeah.
I learn?
Well, and that accountability piece is such a biggie, right? In so much of what we do.
Yes. And this way it is built in. And we know that it takes more than 30 days for somebody to build a new habit. But we figure that if they're successful, and they are successful using new techniques, that reinforces the likelihood they'll continue to use it. And the nice thing about the peer learning groups is that now they have a support network.
Mhm.
Before you send somebody to training, they might go with one or two people, but when they come back, they're literally speaking a different language than the other managers who didn't go. So it's
Yeah.
very hard for them to get support. In this
Yeah.
case, their support network is right there.
Mhm.
And the whole purpose of focusing on managers is that their jobs are to set employees up for success. And that's always been my message through all the management training I've done for all these years. And the only way they can set employees up for success is if they're set up for success.
Mhm. Yeah, and
And there's a lot of statistics that show employees don't leave organizations, they leave managers. And in
right.
today's world, there's a lot of reasons why people are leaving.
Mhm.
And there has to be a lot of good reasons why they might choose to come work for an organization. And if the managers aren't trained, people know that.
Yeah. Yeah, you can tell the difference between somebody who's received training and somebody who hasn't. Even those minor things that someone can just adjust in their interactions and their relationships helps them to support those folks below them, if you will, to help them build and gain success. Mm.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things I wanted to ask though is how do you do that in an environment where management might be competitive or it's the environment is one of competition and less of support? How do you encourage those successes?
That's a difficult question to answer because management has to bring us in.
Mm, mhm,
And so if management is not supportive of building skills, and if management, and we're talking about upper management, of
mhm,
course,
mhm.
and if upper management isn't willing to reinforce those values of collaboration and continual learning, then it's not likely that they're going to be contracting with us.
Right, right. So true. So true.
So, as much as I'd like to be a crusader rabbit and say, come on, you guys, it doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah. Um, when you're talking about the success of this business, do you work with upper management even as a like the executive C-suite team and maybe work your way down into management, or do you do it the other way around? What are your thoughts about who you would interact with to try and help them out in this peer learning approach?
Upper management has to approve it, but our entree into organizations at this point has been somebody who is working with HR,
Hmm.
and they're the ones who seek us out, and they're the ones who advocate for bringing us in. And the reason why is that if you think about it, if managers aren't doing their job, HR is the one who has to step in.
Oh yeah.
Manager doesn't want to give negative feedback to an employee or manage discipline or grievance. HR comes
Mhm.
in. HR is also the one who's sitting there hearing all the complaints from the employees.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then
exactly.
ultimately, HR is the one that's having to do the recruitment to keep filling positions from the revolving door under some manager who's not competent.
Well, and you're speaking to one of the biggest issues that I know you were alluding to before about the employee engagement and employee retention issues that we've all been struggling with of late because of the pandemic, because of various factors influencing people's desire to stay at home or and work from home versus being at the office and various other factors going on. Maybe you could speak to that and what you're finding with what you're teaching and how that's working to maintain employee retention.
I have to clarify what it is we do. Once a peer learning, when we are invited in to do the peer learning, we send out a digital survey to find out what the managers feel they need to learn. Upper management looks at that and says, okay, these are the top 3 or 4 things we want them to be working with. The groups are formed around that. I do a virtual 3-hour orientation to introduce them to what peer learning is and how it works and that it works, to have them go through a mini module so they know what they'll do when they get into their first session on their own, and to build some psychological safety because the very beginning of the first session, they've got to admit, I'm not doing well. And there are very few
Mhm.
organizations that say, good for you. So we're not, once the peer learning groups start, we're not involved in any way because those are completely self facilitated. I will know when we debrief at the end of a set of a module, which is 2 sessions. May hear what the impact is, what the barriers are, what they're able to accomplish. But I'm not actively engaged in that.
Mm, mhm. Yeah. But do you find that because you've provided this group support through this peer learning process, that those employees tend to stay longer and maintain that relationship, in an organization?
I would like to be able to say, yes, absolutely. I know that that's true. But it depends on the organization. There
Mm,
are some, the way our process works, they purchase 1 or more modules.
mhm,
And once the orientation has been taken care of, it's up to them. Are they going to schedule it? Are they going to meet? Are the groups going to stay intact
mhm,
or not? And it's not something that I have control over at this time. If
mhm,
I have good communication with upper management, then I might have some say about that. But
mhm.
that hasn't been the experience so far.
I see. Okay. Well, and you were speaking to some of the issues that upper management might choose from in your various modules. What have you found as far as the modules that you've provided that seem to be most often needed?
Oh, that's a very good question. Performance management,
Mm. And what's
uh,
involved in performance management?
one, being clear about what your expectations are. There
Isn't
are
that
a
the
lot
truth?
of, uh, I won't say there are a lot of managers, but there can be a tendency to say, I know it when I see it.
I
Or,
totally hear you. It's so true. And it's like it's in their head and they haven't revealed it to anyone else. It's this great secret unintentionally, but it's this great secret. And you're going, I thought this is what you asked for. I gave it to you. It's not what you asked for.
right. And also, what's the feedback
Hmm.
mechanism? we've had this traditional, we'll give feedback on an annual basis. Well, back in the 70s, I created a performance evaluation system for the state of Wisconsin where there was a continual, you know, feedback, coaching. And even today, that's not endemic. That isn't
No.
happening
Yeah.
everywhere.
And yet the research indicates, though, that this is definitely better, provides consistent opportunities for the person to learn and grow in a particular area or areas that allow them greater success.
Absolutely. Um, it doesn't matter, there is, there may still be this belief that if somebody is performing well, then that's enough.
Mm,
They don't need any feedback because they're doing just fine. We'll spend our time on the people who aren't performing up to snuff. But speaking as somebody who fell into the category of performing above and beyond and not getting any feedback at all, that's a great way to for your top talent to get burnt out and want to leave, which is what
mm.
I did.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, so maybe you could speak to that a bit more.
I'm trying to think what to say.
Well, do you find there's
When you are working and totally loyal and putting in the hours and more hours than you're being paid for, uh, it's easy for you to become a pariah.
Mm,
Other people, you don't have time to stand around the water cooler. You don't build relationships with other people because you're so focused on getting the work done,
mhm,
and that's highly stressful. It impacted me dreadfully physically. I
mm.
literally lost the use of my left arm because of the
Oh my
stress.
goodness.
And I was in a rather strange situation where I was working in state government and brought in by the head of the agency to investigate allegations against a manager. So I did an investigation. I documented that, yes, those allegations were true. This
Oh wow.
manager was abusive and was not competent. And then the next day, I was put under the supervision of that manager.
What?
So I left that agency.
Oh, I can only imagine. Talk
Yeah.
about your retribution.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Or
insane.
being set up to fail. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's
Yeah.
awful.
So when someone, one of the things that I found, and I know unionization is not this happy thing now, but in those days there were unions, and the people who were union stewards were so bright,
Mm,
were so outspoken about what they saw needed to be done.
mhm.
And those are the ones who really were targeted,
Oh, wow.
you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, it's
Um,
almost like you can imagine as a lobbyist on, on the Hill, that if you're trying, that you get targeted by the opposing party of that topic. Um, but wow, the target thing is really concerning these days, given the tenor of our society. So, yeah. Well,
yeah.
and so you've had this massive amount of experience. What have been the successes that you've seen in the managers that you've worked with over the past, say, 5 or 10 years?
You know, I don't know that I can answer that. And that's a sad thing for me.
I'll say.
Um, I will run into people who recognize me from training, and they will say, I'm using what you taught. I've gotten promotions. My employees are doing well. But that's catch as catch can.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, it's different if you are within an organization and you are training people that you're going to see every day. Again, as an external consultant, that's not my situation.
Mhm. So you don't have an opportunity to see the fruits of your labor come to fruition.
No, not
Mhm.
unless there's follow-up, and sometimes in training we can schedule follow-up, but that follow-up is in a few months. It's not in a few years to
Mhm.
know what has ultimately happened. You know that I mean, I've certainly have seen managers get promoted, and then the assumption is they were promoted because they were doing a good job.
Mhm.
I'd like to believe that that's the case,
Yeah,
but I
exactly.
don't have any documentation to say, and their employees were thriving, because
Mhm.
all I can do is hope that that was the case.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly what you're offering sets them up for that success. But I am wondering, when you talk about what you do, how does that influence working excellence in your business?
You want to define working excellence?
Well, I want you to define working excellence.
Ah, sneaky, very
I know.
sneaky.
Aren't I sneaky? Yes. What is working excellence to you?
Working excellence to me is when, uh, if we're talking about a manager, the manager is aware of the skills and abilities of their staff, is actively engaged in supporting them with resources, with training, with feedback, so that they can be as successful as possible in what they do. And ideally, working excellence is when a manager is supporting employees who are able to then succeed that manager
Mhm.
or go off and become managers themselves because they've had a great experience, they have a good model, and they know what to do.
Nice, nice. And so that application of working excellence then leads them to what, do you think?
Well, if managers are performing well and their staff is engaged and performing up to their strengths
Mhm.
and being helped to develop additional strengths, then the culture is a positive, psychologically safe culture.
Mhm.
The performance is high, so productivity, customer service are all high.
Mm.
I mean,
Mhm.
we don't have managers who just manage for the sake of managing. I mean, we have organizations who are there to serve some public or some customer. It's
Mhm.
one or the other, and
Right.
that's a customer either way. And if there are lots of sayings about, well, if you don't treat your employees well, then they're not going to treat the customers well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if the employees I was asked to do a customer service training years ago, and I my first question to management was, why? What's the problem? Well, they're getting complaints from customers.
Mhm.
Okay, so what are those complaints? Okay, and so I told management that I would take the job only if they accepted their responsibility for setting the employees up for success. Because if an employee is expected to serve customers in a certain period of time, but they don't have the necessary resources or technological uh, program to support that, then why? It's not that the employee needs training.
Mhm.
This is a system issue. It needs to be addressed on a systematic basis.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, and they agreed, which was great. But there are, we know of managers who, when they are unwilling to do their job, will say, "We need training in this," and
Right,
then
right.
everybody is sent to that training. Everybody but that employee realizing, "I don't need this," and then it gives training a bad name.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and they're not bringing the knowledge back to the workplace. They're not bringing the skills that they have learned as an may not have learned because they had their wall up, but the idea that that's not coming back into the workplace. So it's wasted funds from the organizational perspective. And that frustrates the upper management and leadership. So I totally hear you on that. One of the things that you talk about is psychological safety. And I know how critical that is at this juncture. And I wonder how you permeate that throughout your lessons that you're offering or the learning opportunities that you're offering.
Well, let me speak to what we do for the Peer Learning Institute. In that orientation, we have them go through a mini module that has to do with building trust.
Mm.
And when were you in a situation where you didn't feel that you could trust what was going on? What was missing? What did you need? And then we use a an adaptation of a program called Know Me. It was designed for South Africa when Mandela came into power, and the Afrikaners and the blacks were terrified that they were going to have to interact with each other. Well, the whole
Mm.
purpose of the game and how we use it is for people to get to know each other on a human level. We all were born. We all have had struggles. We've all had joys. We've all had interactions, and the game pulls that out. People are able to. It's up to them. It's based on the Johari window, which
Oh, nice. Uh-huh.
you're familiar with that.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, listeners may not, but the whole idea is there are things you know about me that I don't know. There are things I know about me that you don't know. The more we ask and tell each other, the more we learn about ourselves and the other person.
Hmm.
And people find that they love that experience. They don't want it to stop. Many of
Oh,
them
nice.
ask, can I then, is it okay if I take it to my employees? Because we fear what we don't know,
Absolutely true. Absolutely. Yeah.
and we're not going to feel comfortable opening up and being honest in the peer learning group, which is where they need to be. We need them to be able to say, I'm having trouble with this is what I tried, it didn't work. All right, let's look at root causes. Well, I wasn't dealing with that properly.
Hmm.
Here's some things to think about. I think this thing is going to work more effectively for me personally in dealing with that situation. But we can't have that open, honest conversation if people don't feel that they can trust who they're with.
Right. So true. So true. Well, I really want to say thank you so much, Deborah. The time is up, and I want to say thank you for coming to the show and for sharing your expertise with us. It's just been lovely. So I'm in awe of your myriad experiences that you were able to bring to our audience to learn more about the peer learning in particular, which I think is such a critical element of management in general. So thank you
Well,
so much.
thank you. You have been a real pleasure to have a conversation with. You're excellent in what you do.
Oh, well, thank you. And I want to thank you for listening to WPVM LP in Asheville. You're listening to In Awe, Inspiring and Advancing Workplace Excellence on every Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. I'm Laura Wagenecht. Stay tuned to The Empowered Whistleblower with Dawn Westmoreland right here on WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial and globally at WPVM fm.org. Take care.